I want to welcome Laura M. Brotherson. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist and a certified sex therapist. She is the author of the best-selling book, And They Were Not Ashamed, Strengthening Marriages Through Sexual Fulfillment, and her latest book, Knowing Her Intimately, 12 Keys for Creating a Sextraordinary Marriage. She counsels with individuals, couples, and families in private practice and online, and is the host of the Marital Intimacy Show podcast. Also a certified family life educator, Laura is actively engaged in providing marriage education through couples cruises, articles, newsletters, radio and television broadcasts, and presenting at conferences and workshops. Laura is passionate about helping couples navigate the intricacies of intimacy to help build stronger marriages and families. She and her husband, Kevin, of 25 years, are the founders of strengtheningmarriage.com, your trusted resource for education, products, and services to strengthen marriages intimately. To learn more, visit strengtheningmarriage.com. So, Laura, I want to welcome you. I'm so grateful that you were available to do this for us.
So welcome.
And as you know, we have been reading your book. We're doing the first 9 chapters this month, and then next month we're finishing up with the next 3. And the ladies have loved your book. So I'm super anxious to ask you some questions. Some of these questions have come in. Personal message from the ladies, being a little bit like, okay, do I dare ask this? So,
of course you do.
Anyway, we're going to ask. We're going to ask those questions that nobody wants or dares ask. We're going to shine some light on sexual intimacy today for sure. So first, I would love it if you wouldn't mind sharing with us the reason you chose to be a certified sex therapist and a little bit about your journey as a woman as you discovered your own issues with the good girl syndrome.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I had always known I wanted to be a marriage counselor. I got my bachelor's degree in family science. And so that was kind of always in the mix. When, so probably about 2002, when I was asked to teach a local community course on strengthening marriages, actually for the LDS Churches Institute program. That 12-week course ended up becoming my first book, And They Were Not Ashamed. And it was during that class where I think 3 or 4 of my classes ended up being directly about sexual intimacy, in addition to all the other, dimensions of marriage. And I knew by the time they asked me to teach it again, I was like, this needs to get out to a wider audience than just the couples I have here. So that kind of started, that got me into writing the first book. Even before I was, I had a graduate degree at that point. I only had my bachelor's at that point. And that pretty much sealed the deal that I was going to become a certified sex therapist. If any of your ladies have tried to look for them, they are very few and far between. And, even less findable for those that might be particularly religious or that are looking for a woman. And very few marriage counselors go on to get certified as a sex therapist, which is almost like having a second master's degree. There's that much training, that much supervision, that much additional work involved, and there's very few people that have gone that extra step. So that's the gist of that part. I guess the other question that you asked. So my journey too, I talk a lot about that in my first book, or a little bit more about that in my first book. But basically, we had a great marriage. I had learned a lot of stuff about sex as preparing to become a marriage counselor. But I really was the poster girl for the good girl syndrome. I mean, my dad laughed when he saw the first first manuscript of my first book. He's like, "Are you kidding me? You, of all people?" And he's like, "Laura, did you even kiss anyone in high school?" I'm like, "Yes, I did. Thank you." But he was shocked because that just, the good girl syndrome, I was it. And so a lot of a lot of women that kind of have the feeling that sex is kind of something, yes, and I had the understanding that it was a good thing, but thinking that, knowing that intellectually and knowing that internally are two very different things. And our society at large, and society religiously for a lot of Christian women, is just not very affirming of sexuality. And so, you know, even with a good marriage, in my case, there was just still so much missing. And that's the information I had found to teach the marriage class, and then to teach this, and then to write this first book, and so on and so on.
Well, and I think that's perfect. I think it's so valuable that you experienced it firsthand.
Yeah.
So you are able to relate to women, you know, and I want to point out too, so my ladies know, that you do online counseling as well, which I think is fantastic. And
I just have a really long wait list right now, so I don't want to get your
okay. All right, long wait list, ladies. If you're interested, but I just think that's so great that you've brought it out to allow, you know, people from all over, and not just because you're in the Boise area. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's just not there. You just can't get enough help around. I mean, I counsel all over the place, so yeah, it's needed.
It is so needed, and maybe what we need is for you to be training other therapists to do what you do, and maybe you already do that.
I will.
Yeah, it is very, very needed. So my next question kind of consisted of, I loved on page 46, you talked about 3 considerations for women: that sex as a decision, the natural unfolding process, and then the focus on self. And I felt like these 3 small sections were so important for women to understand. Do you want to explain those a little bit in detail of those 3 things?
Yeah, you bet. That is funny, because you mentioning those 3 things, those are very big deals that I don't spend. I mean, you know, the first book is like a 400-page book. It's like, you know, I can only say so much. That's why I had to write another book. But that the first point that you brought up, I think was, let's see, sex is a decision.
Yes.
So in my new book, I go into that extensively, because basically sex is a decision is step 1 of what I call our female sexual response. Women are not walking around with desire in hand like men tend to be. So that sex is a decision. And I brought a couple of things that I use all the time with clients. So like, this is one of my handouts that I use all the time. And there's a box down here at the bottom that says step 0. And maybe I can give this to you and you can share it with your ladies.
Oh, yeah, I would love that.
But this step 0 is like a contextual, the relationship of the marriage is what makes us decide whether we're going to want to decide. Mm-hmm. And then step 1 right here is sex is a decision. So that's step 1 based on how is the relationship. And if you don't know that you've got to make a decision, if you're sitting around thinking, why am I never in the mood? Why am I broken? Mm-hmm. And your husband thinks you're broken too, of course, because you don't work right, according to him, kind of. And then, so you've got to know that sex is a decision. You're not going to feel sex. And that's what the other 4 steps are, is basically this step 0. But then these 4 steps are: sex is a decision. Now you need to talk me into it. Now you need to touch me into it. Now, step 4, I have some desire. So women are going to be partway into arousal, like I'm saying, in the 3, 4, 5 on a 10 scale, before they may actually experience desire itself.
Okay.
And people do not know that, particularly about women.
Yeah, I think that is so vital, because you're right. We do sit back and go, why am I not having this feeling? Why am I not having this uncontrollable urge that he talks about? What's wrong with me? How am I broken? So this just kind of validates we're made different. We are totally made different. That's something, that's kind of the basis of what I teach women, is we speak totally different languages, and it obviously includes sex as well.
Yeah.
So Yeah.
And Trina, my joke on this, because people give me, clients give me crap about this all the time. They're just like, why are women this way? And I just say, listen, God had to make somebody with a little bit of a brake system, because if we didn't, nobody would get anything else done but having sex all day. So, that was just his way of figuring that out.
Yeah, it's so true. Well, and it is true because we do balance each other.
Mm-hmm.
And even in our different languages, our strengths balance his weaknesses. His strengths balance our weaknesses. Heavenly Father did not mess up.
Yeah.
He did not mess up.
Yeah,
he knew what he was doing. Okay, so the second one was the natural unfolding.
Yeah. So that one, so in my next book, all of these things are talked about in significant more detail, obviously, because I've worked with clients a lot more since then, so I've got a lot more context for those. The basic gist of the natural unfolding is that if you're going into sex with an objective, like we've got to have an orgasm this time, or we've got to not have premature ejaculation this time. When there is goal orientation to sex, it makes it really difficult for an orgasm to occur for women particularly, because an orgasm is an involuntary response. That means you have no control over it. It's going to happen because you are relaxed, because you are focused on sensing, you're focused on your spouse, you're just engaged, you're just present. And that mindfulness almost sexually, which women also don't know do real well, keeps us from usually getting to orgasm for those that struggle with that, is because we're focused too much on something instead of just relaxing into it.
Okay, I love that. In fact, I had one of my clients tell me that she had a therapist tell her one of the most important things a woman can do while getting in the mood and during that foreplay is to take deep breaths and breathe.
Yeah.
So and that goes right along with what you said. We need to relax.
Yeah.
Stop thinking about what the ultimate goal is.
Yeah.
I really like that. I like that. And then go ahead.
And related to that, Trina, is that a woman's number one challenge with sex is mental discipline. So think about that. If we are the World Wide Web,
yes,
and so everything is ever present before us at all times,
yes,
and so our husband's like, can you focus here? Can you focus? And we're not good at it because, and so one of the things that is one of my tools that I call arousal helpers which I talk about in my other book, is to focus on your breathing, particularly in the beginning stages of lovemaking, because it does help you to close all those mental windows in your mind, to focus in on being present, to focus in on your body, to focus in on sensing. And that's what helps you to move into this more natural unfolding. I have other steps as well that are kind of a little bit more demanding of your attention. And just one, for example, is being more active in touching him. That's kind of 2 steps up. But just as an example, instead of just kind of laying there like dead fish, like a dead fish, we're now kissing more and touching more and feeling more and rubbing your hands through his hair more, because it's demanding your attention. It's a mental discipline skill.
Yes. Oh, I see that. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. That makes total sense. Yeah, I like that. I'm so anxious to read your new book. Obviously we probably should have read it before, but
It's fine. It's fine.
Great content.
Yeah, you'll get a lot of good stuff, and we just finished the audio book, so that will be available Monday, probably.
Great.
And so people can listen while they're reading if they wanted to.
Well, and I bought the Audible for both the other book because I'm trying to get so much content in my head that I'm always listening to something, and so I have both. I've read it and listened to it. So
awesome.
All right.
Yeah, and the third one, so focus on self that you talked about. This is a really interesting one, but it kind of goes back to a little bit the World Wide Web concept. We already talked a little bit about that our brain is in so many different places that we do need to kind of focus on self. The second piece of that is women already tend to be more other-oriented and men tend to be more self-oriented. It's a gender characteristic. And so, if particularly, I just find it fascinating that that, certainly it's a great thing to be very other oriented and selfless, but in sex, that doesn't work real great for women.
Mm-hmm.
It works great for men, but pretty much most of the sexual teaching that we tend to get, particularly in, kind of religious circles, is almost opposite for what women should do. So everything we hear about to young men and young women, the women should almost do the opposite of.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah.
And so the focus on self is really important, because you've got to be able to tune in, because again, we're the World Wide Web and we're 4 steps away from desire. So that puts us at an immediate disadvantage or difference with our spouse.
Yeah.
And so that's why we have to be given permission to focus on self. It's about me. You need to focus on me. And this is why I often also say women really kind of need to be the first priority in sex.
Yeah.
And if orgasm is in the play there, it kind of should be her orgasm sort of is the first focus, because of all of these different things. So that's what I mean by that. And those are 3 really big points that don't talk about much in the first book.
Yeah. And I just want to say, when I read that and read the focus on self, how much I appreciated reading that, because I had told my husband, we've been married 26 years, and I had told him that during sex is the only time I feel like I'm allowed to be selfish. Yeah. And so that totally fit it, because I'm like, I don't know if this is a bad thing or a good thing, but it's the only time I'm totally selfish on what, I hope to get out of it or whatever. And it doesn't happen every time, but he would hope it happens every time. Yeah. But, so when I read this, I was just like, oh my gosh, this is okay. This is what the ultimate goal is. And so that was so validating for me. So
I'm so glad. And you remind me too of, I was talking with a man who didn't necessarily think it was really important that I wrote a book like this. And he just said, I don't know why you would need a 400-page book about sex. I mean, really all you need to know is don't be selfish. And I thought, yeah, that works great for a man. It just doesn't work great for a woman.
Yeah.
So even that just simple, flippant concept in his mind just reinforces how off we really are with sexuality.
That's so true.
That's sad.
It is sad. We're going to change that.
Yes, we are. We are, absolutely.
Okay, so the next question I had is, I love how you explained so well that intimacy between husband and wife is ordained of God, and that it is a gift to us. He made us to experience sexual relations with the needed parts to create that enjoyment. And as men, this seems to be more natural for them. So my question is, what can we do as women to help it be more natural for us? Or will it not be? Do we need to just go through those 4 steps you just described, and we don't necessarily get that natural connection with intimacy like they do? Because for them, they don't even really have to think about it. They just can do it.
Yeah. So a couple of thoughts. Number 1, women don't really nurture or embrace their sexuality the way that men do. So just a very simple, almost kind of a crude concept, but men have basically been kind of touching their sexual body parts almost every day for their entire lives.
Yeah.
Women pretty much never directly touch their sexual body parts that really matter for sexuality, pretty much ever. So just the conditioning level is so different. The nurturing level is so different. The acceptance level is so different. The embracing level is so different. I mean, when's the last time you ever heard anybody say something positive about women embracing their sexuality?
Yeah.
I was speaking at a conference probably about a year ago now, and I just said, there's probably 200 people in the room, and I just said, I'd just love to have people raise their hands if they can remember the last time they heard something positive said about sexuality in any context. And I was there with probably mostly professionals, I think, at that point. No, it wasn't. Yes, professionals, but a lot of lay people too. And I had one man raise his hand. And I asked him what, and he says, I was just at a conference last week and they had somebody like you talking about sex. And I was like, okay, guys, that is not okay.
No.
That is so not okay.
Yeah.
So I kind of challenged them all to go home and some way, somehow say something to someone affirming about sexuality, especially female sexuality.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we don't have that. So the first chapter of my second book is called, they're all T's. There are 12 T's in the contents. But the first one is transform sexual identity. And what the research tells us is that many women have an asexual view of self. That means you see yourself as a social being, a physical being, a spiritual being, but not a sexual being. So big time.
Yeah.
That basically my good girl syndrome, and it kind of amps it up the next level, which is now we've got to embrace that sexual identity.
Okay.
And that's the solution to chapter 1 of my first book, which is the good girl syndrome.
Okay.
Because now we need to include healthy sexuality and delicious sexuality in our marriages as part of what makes us whole and alive and complete.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I have, let me just show you, I have a diagram in my second book, my Knowing Her Intimately book, that just, this parts of self. So there's 6 parts of self here.
Okay.
And so all of those parts of self, we generally work on fairly well.
Yeah.
But that one part, that sexual part, that's missing.
Yeah.
So you're not whole.
Yeah.
So this is not something we're just doing because our husband wants to have sex more often.
Mm-hmm.
This is something we're doing because we want to be complete.
Okay. So you would recommend then that ladies need to be proactive. They need, because I have, I've had clients that have shared, I just don't need it as much as my husband. I just don't need it. But I want to.
Don't.
Yeah.
Well, why would they? They're 4 steps away from desire. They don't even know they have desire a couple steps away.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever told them to embrace it or nurture it or desire it or like it. And those that feel like they already because there are some that do already, they don't have that same feel. And they kind of feel like they're weird.
Mm-hmm.
And they do kind of like sex.
True.
They do embrace it. So yeah, it's not surprising that women feel that way. But when I go through in the Knowing Her and They Were Not Ashamed in chapter 5, and I list all of the differences between men and women, the very first one I list in chapter 5 is actually a myth. Men have a stronger sex drive, women have a weaker sex drive. It's a myth because it's not true. We have different sex drives, as you've said. Mm-hmm. And until you know how they're different, and maybe even a little bit of in your mind why they're different, you're not going to be able to work within the new reality to make it awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot of education involved in getting that. But the key basically is just, we've got to embrace it. And then we as women actually have to work on it and nurture it a little bit.
Okay. So it is us being active on our part. It's not just going to happen on its own. Yeah. We have to do like we're doing, reading the books. We've got to have a safe group that maybe we can speak openly about it, because most of the ladies in my membership group, their moms never talked to them for their honeymoon. They didn't have that experience of being able to communicate what's normal, what's not normal. And so we've got to be able to talk about it, but talk about it because I know a lot of women that talk negatively. Yeah. And that's not helping. That's not helping. So,
and Trina, maybe 2 little simple steps for your ladies could be, number 1 is get educated, which is what you're already helping them do. Number 2 is, well, actually, let me give you 3, and there's 3 E's just off the top of my head.
Okay.
1 is get educated. 2 is embrace your sexuality. And 3 is develop the emotional connection in your marriage. 3 E's. Mm-hmm. Those are your simple 3 first steps. I'm going to write this down too, because
I'm writing that down. I love that. Develop emotional connection.
That's why I love doing these interviews, is I learn stuff and think of new stuff.
Like, oh, that was really good. Yes, I totally get that. Okay, so, all right. In your work that you do, how vital is it that women learn to do these steps to learn how to love, enjoy, and embrace sex in creating a healthy marriage. Because I have, in my experience, if your sex life isn't good, it affects a lot of other things. It's almost foundational. And you wouldn't think that it would be that much weighted in a marriage.
Yeah.
It really is, because it's not just about sex.
Mm-mm.
What it creates between the two of you. And I always tell women, it's so healing. It's so healing to a relationship. I mean, you think if you've had some issues and then you get a chance to be intimate together, how it's like all of a sudden like, oh, I do love him. You know, there's a healing aspect. And so how, in what you've seen with the couples you work with, how important it is that women do this work, because what could the possible outcome be if they don't?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is very important work. I mean, a couple of thoughts come to mind. Number one, I think, is that for most men, this is probably the primary way they feel loved. And so at the very minimum, if women don't work on that, you're going to have a husband that doesn't feel loved. And that has a consequence. Mm-hmm. And that is not the reason alone to work on it, but that's maybe a good first one. That's usually the one women can think of first. Yeah. But the second one is kind of what I've already talked about, which is it's a part of your wholeness. And if you leave a part of your wholeness out, what I believe about marriage is that it's divinely designed to find all of your weak spots and rough edges and smooth them off. Mm-hmm. And those that are willing to do that soul grinding work will succeed and thrive in marriage. Those that aren't will probably take the route of, let's just end this and try again. And then they'll have the same work to do the next time.
Yeah.
So, and the other thing that you made me think of too is that I kind of call it the 80-20 rule with sex, in a couple of ways. But number one, when sex is not going well, it will feel like it consumes 80% of your marriage in a negative way. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When sex is going well, it goes back to the diagram I showed you, which is that it's more in the 20% range. Yeah. It's actually 6 is like 16-17%, but I use 20 because it's easier. But when it's good, it really kind of just finds its equal place among those other really great dimensions. But I still agree with what you're saying, though, too, is that it's still the crowning jewel. It's still the cherry on top of all of those 6 dimensions. In a lot of ways, and I guess we could almost probably say that about any of them, but for my purposes, I guess, I really do think that sexual dimension, to get sextraordinary, which is why it's my new favorite word, is you've got to develop all of those other areas, because it requires you to become whole in order to get sex to work the way God intended it.
Well, and that's what these ladies that I'm working with, they're like-minded women. They're actively working in a forward intention to strengthen their marriages. And so they all are eager and wanting and so willing to learn this. And ladies, we're going to spread this. I want them to share with their friends your book. And we need to, I even told the ladies, okay, we're going to do like an actual like book club, neighborhood book club. And then I'm like, good. Last thing I need is somebody saying, did you hear Trina's doing a book club on sex? You know, I'm like, why am I worried about that? I shouldn't be worried about that, right?
No, you should not at all.
So I just want
I'm proud of you, Trina.
Yes, we're going to do it, because I just so want the women, I want these young girls that are going into marriage to have the right perception and to have the right knowledge. I mean, it empowers them. And
Trina, and Trina, for you, I mean, what you're doing here, if people don't do what you're doing, that's part of our dilemma, is that there's no good, healthy, respected, trustworthy people out there, or not enough of them out there, doing things like a book club about a sex book.
Yeah.
And so that normalizes it, it affirms it, it strengthens that, it does all those things. And as long as we don't have enough people doing that, we're not tipping the scales into this healthy favor.
Yeah. Well, and I had kind of an aha moment this morning. My son, he's 16 years old, he's leaving to school, and I said, hey, I have an interview with an author at 3:00, so I need you to be quiet if you come home. He goes, oh, which one is it? He goes, what book's it on? And I'm like, it's on sex. And I was so proud of myself. It's on sex. And he wasn't even like really stunned because we talked more openly, but I had to okay, pat myself on the back. I just told my 16-year-old I'm going to be talking about sex for the next hour. I was like, yeah, okay.
That's awesome.
We're going to do this.
That's awesome.
Okay. So the next one is, all right, I loved this. You debunked my biology teacher from my senior year of high school. It's not very often you can remember those exact moments. But I can remember him standing up in front of the class and saying, women will have an orgasm maybe 1 in 4 to 5 times. That's kind of the average. And so, I'm a senior in high school, so I'm thinking, oh, well, that kind of stinks, this is what we're going to have here. And then when I read about, obviously, the clitoris being only given to us for one purpose, and that's it, and that is pleasure, and that you debunked that, and you said women not only can have one every time, they can have multiple ones back to back. And I personally have not had the issue with orgasms that I know many of my friends have had. And so I'm actually been one that they've come to me and asking me Trina, tell me what you do. So I've been grateful that I've been able to share that. But I would like you to kind of just answer these couple of questions. First of all, what do you suggest for women who have struggled to climax, either by not allowing themselves to let go and enjoying all aspects of intimacy, or by not understanding how their bodies work? What do you do when you're working with women who, they struggle with climaxing, they don't understand 100% how their body even works? How can women go there without feeling like they're doing something they shouldn't be doing?
Yeah, so a couple of things. First, going back to what you were talking about with the high school person, the unfortunate reality is that the research does show that most women don't. It's about a third of women that don't regularly experience an orgasm. It's not necessary. That just is what currently is occurring, because I think people don't understand some of the things we're talking about. So it's very not a have to, but it is actually kind of a reality, if that makes sense.
Okay, yes.
So if you're not sure, see, a lot of women actually don't understand about having a clitoris, where it is, what it's for, how important it is in the sexual process. I chuckle because during that first class that I taught, that marriage course, one of the classes was specifically walking through the female sexual response. And of course, a big part of it is talking about the clitoris. And a couple that I knew were attending my class, and they come up to me afterwards, and they said, oh my gosh, Laura, if you had said clitoral stimulation one more time, I was going to lose it. I love it. I love it. But the point being is that the couples do need to figure out what is needed there. And so initially couples can start with just kind of making a point, without being goal-oriented, about figuring out what do you like? Do you like movement? Do you need pressure? Am I starting too early in the arousal scale process? Do I need to wait till you're more in a 5-6 range instead of at a 1-2 range? Do I need to, what? And they basically have to do trial and error, because I can't even answer that for them, because everybody's different. I can suggest some different things they can try, but that usually needs to be something that a couple needs to at least kind of make a point of saying, okay, let's just try some things. Let's try different, my fingers versus your fingers, with a little bit extra lubrication versus just whatever we normally have. I mean, that simple of a change can make a difference.
Yeah.
So that's really important. And I will say, though, that I do have one client right now where she did feel like, okay, Laura, I've been married long enough, I think 17, 18 years. And she's just like, I still haven't had an orgasm. And I'm thinking I'm going to do what we've kind of talked about, which is it's so uncomfortable for me to have my husband kind of there paying it, like what spectating is what we call it, spectatoring, spectatory, you know, either way, it goes both ways. But if he's there, I'm not able to relax. And so for her, that created a dilemma where she was like, okay, and, you know, again, for me, even as a sex therapist and a, you know, very not a fan, I mean, very opposed to masturbation on multiple levels for multiple good reasons. This is not masturbation. This is learning. This is a woman trying to catch up to a man who has touched himself for a million times his whole life. So this is not masturbation at all.
Yes.
Do you get me?
Yes, I totally get you. And I love this. I love this. In fact, I had a client, I was going to meet with her, and I had told her to read your book. And in that part, there's a part in your book, I can't remember where it was at, where you said you might have to use your own hand.
Yep.
Text me. Oh my gosh, is this okay? And I'm like, yes, this is okay. It really is, because it is right. We don't know our bodies like they do. We really don't. And if we don't know it, how are we supposed to express to them what we need?
Right.
We don't even know.
Yeah, and in that context too, Trina, people need to remember that within the context of lovemaking itself, there's a little bit more leeway than I think a lot of us understand. Because you're sharing something, it's different than if either of you are out doing this on your own because you need a stress relief tool. You know, that's completely different intention.
Okay.
And that's why we're talking about something different.
Okay.
So, and so maybe, you know, for those that feels a little weird with, then yeah, we're just laying in the bed together, and he's just, maybe he's even watching, I've had clients do this where he's even watching TV while she's laying there right beside him under the bed, trying to figure out what feels good with her clitoris. He's right there. He might be holding her hand. He might be, and if that helps people feel better, hey, I was poster child for that. So, I mean, I get that.
Yeah.
But you got to just kind of think through. And this is where a lot of chapter 2 of my next book talks all about thoughts and core beliefs. And when you've got a bunch of negative core beliefs and negative thinking about sex, it's going to be an inhibitor. So part of the answer to this is also making sure we're addressing unnecessary inhibitions.
Okay. Yeah, I really like that. In fact, I've had some of my clients even do the assignments with the left hand, or the hand you don't usually use, to kind of try and get those core beliefs out, you know, that, you know, your blueprint that's messing up with your, you know, of what the reality of intimacy should be in a relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. So there is quite a few things that people can do. And so you really just kind of especially need to figure out what's going on with, you know, the clitoral stimulation that you need. But remember too, there's a lot more than just this. We're almost thinking a little bit like a man right here, where couples come to me and they're like, okay, we're not having an orgasm. And we immediately go to a technique or a position. That's almost the last place that we usually need to go.
Really? Okay. Yeah.
So that's important to know.
So it's more emotional.
It's more that, well, so let me just read through my T's. Okay. So number 1 is transforming your sexual identity. Check or no check. Thoughts and beliefs. Check or no check. Tenderness, thoughtfulness, trust. That's that emotional connection. Check or no check. 4, time. Do I make it a priority? Do I spend any time on it? 5, do I have a transition process to go from mommy mode to lover mode? 6, do we talk, connect enough? 7, do I get enough touch, the right kind, inside and outside the bedroom? 8, are we doing the right techniques? Do I understand how my body's wired? That's key for technique. That's 8 chapters in. That's 8 chapters in.
Wow.
9 is how tuned in are we? Can we read each other outside the bedroom and inside the bedroom? Because women don't want to be directing traffic inside the bedroom.
So true.
We're trying to focus here.
It's so true.
And then 10 is teasing and playfulness. 11 is treats, the variety, novelty, fun. And 12 is transcendence and surrender. Many couples, many women, based on your question, get stuck in chapter 12, which is I'm a little bit nervous to let go.
Let go.
And so maybe it's not about clitoral stimulation.
Yeah.
It might be that I don't feel safe enough to let go,
Yeah.
or I have some hangups that I can't let go with, or I'm just worried that I'm going to do something dumb.
Yeah, I can see.
So we've got 12 areas to check in on.
Yeah.
And so that's why I wanted to pull away from just the technique of clitoral stimulation, even though it is super important. I just want to balance it for you.
Yes, I think that's super important. Well, my next question, this actually is from one of my ladies. She wanted to know, how do you approach, say she's been learning and reading your book and studying and trying to figure herself out. She's been married for, 26 years actually as well. And she wanted to know what's the best way to approach your husband in what your needs might be or what you want to try, because she's tried and it didn't work. And then, we become vulnerable in even trying to voice any of that. And they, either debunked it or it was like, I'm not interested in that. She's asked to do the sensate focus and he just flat out said no. And so that puts us in a place of, questioning ourselves.
Yep.
And that's a hard place to be in, but we can't change him.
Yep.
So what's your suggestion for women that want to improve, want to try new, but their partner isn't necessarily on board with that?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I do a lot of my work is actually sexual addiction as much as it is sex therapy. And my first thought almost kind of goes to, usually when a guy is not interested in working on this, there's something going on. Because most guys are fairly interested in working on this. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering if either the relationship is just not safe. Mm-hmm. And because sometimes, again, I have more of that kind of dominant personality and some women, and a lot of other women do. And sex is actually a very scary, vulnerable endeavor, not only for women, but I'm going to shift it now to men. Mm-hmm. And so we could just have some, we've got, their identity, their ego, their competence is on the line. There's a lot of things on the line for a guy in this circumstance, leaving addiction out of it. But then if I move into that addiction realm, I think there could be shame if he is doing things on the side. Again, good boy syndrome type stuff where they feel ashamed of their sexuality. They feel threatened if they have to look at it too closely. Mm-hmm. And so I almost would need a little bit more context of, we almost need to figure out what's going on in the relationship first.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And is there a piece that men just kind of have this, I don't know if there's a stereotype of men should just know. They should just know what to do. And then they honestly don't.
Right.
But then when we ask for something specific or, are we offending them in any way? Does that play part in it at all?
Yeah. So great question. And one of the ways I explain it to clients, it's kind of like, so women, our identity is kind of built up in like our children, our family, our home. That's kind of what makes us feel like we're okay. If our kids are good and functioning and decent, we feel like we're an okay person. For men, the equivalent is how well they provide, how competent they are, and oftentimes how happy their wife is, because they're wife pleasers. And so we're kind of messing with a couple of different areas for them, of them being even questioned, of them being not competent, the sexual insecurity that men also have, because even though sex is out there a little more for them, my next book, third book, which will be Knowing Him Sexually, I think we'll go with the sex word instead of the intimacy word for them, is primarily to validate their sexuality, because they don't get any good sexuality affirmation either. Mm-hmm. And so with that, we can, so for men, we do need to kind of look at maybe what they're feeling there. But now back to kind of the specific scenario. Obviously, if I only had access to her, because I'm a big believer, I'm a systems trained therapist. That's what LMF, marriage and family therapists are. And so I know that I change one part of a system, I'm going to change the whole system. Mm-hmm. So I only need one person that will get this. and it will change things for the better. And what that might look like for that woman is she starts figuring out a way to love, connect, affirm, feed him to where he's very more open to whatever she wants.
Yeah.
And it's maybe not what she wants to do because I'm the one who always has to change everything, maybe.
Yeah.
But one person can change things if they'll just dig in and go for it.
That is so true. That's
what that would look like.
Yeah. The women I work with, that's one of my big things. We can't change him. All we can do is work on you. And then they slowly start seeing the changes in their spouse. It's amazing. It really is amazing.
Because we're a system. We're a circle.
Yeah.
You can't change one without changing everything.
That is true. That is so true. Okay. All right. What you discussed on page 250, the possibility of a woman using a vibrator if needed, to help learn how to climax. But you also advise that it should be a temporary solution because of desensitizing and not being able to duplicate it manually. So my question to you is, first, there's kind of a two-part question here. Do you feel this way about all sex toys or aids, number one? And two, if a woman has only been able to climax with a vibrator, is it wrong to use it consistently?
Yeah, no, these are great questions, and I'm glad you're asking them. And I do address them a little bit also on my website and my Q&A I've got there as well. But the context of that first book and the way I answered it is just to make sure people are aware that that a vibrator is difficult to recreate. And so if a vibrator is kind of the first way that you experience an orgasm, it can be harder to experience it another way. That said, if I've been married 20 years and I've never had an orgasm and it's affecting our marriage, and I have an orgasm with the vibrator and we both feel fine about it, go for it.
Yeah.
Heavens, are you kidding? The objective, the whole point of these toys or aids is twofold. Number one, they might be functional. They might be necessary. And number two, they do add to my treats chapter, which is fun, variety, novelty, especially important for a long-term marriage.
Okay.
So yeah, that's the context. You go, girl. Whatever we need.
All right. My ladies are gonna love this. They're gonna love this. Okay, so I have this kind of goes into the next one that you just kind of said. I've been married 26 years. Hormones obviously slow down for both of us at this point. So what do you suggest to encourage and help couples keep the flame lit? Obviously, you talked about this treats package, that we probably need to be implementing more. Is there anything else that you would suggest on, helping keeping that flame going when you're kind of just used to each other,
Yeah, for sure. And hormones and age. I mean, hormones is kind of a parallel for age. What's really great about aging, to be honest, sexually, is that men tend to become a little bit more like women, how women are wired. And women almost become a little bit more like men because they usually have a little more time to get comfortable with themselves, to accept their body image, to learn a little bit more about sex than they knew when they were 25. And so we almost reverse roles a little bit, which can be really nice because what that looks like is now women wanting this emotional connection, this foreplay. Men actually need it too now.
Oh, cool. That's cool.
They actually are not just hot to trot all the time like they were at 20, 22 or whatever. And now they actually do need a little bit of a warm-up period as well. They need to kind of decompress from work. They need to kind of put some of these stressors off their mind.
I love this right now because I know my husband has been frustrated that he needs booting up. So this is going to be good to know that, hon, it's normal. Right?
Okay. Yeah. And that's why that's why I'm normalizing it. And again, this is information that a lot of people don't have. So they think something's wrong, but they just don't realize that, more, being human comes into play and aging comes into play. And you might need to adjust a little to it. Just FYI.
Yeah.
And so the two basic concepts that people need to think about is more emotional connection and foreplay and more stimulation, physical, within.
Okay.
That's just what you need to add.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And knowing the benefits of it, it's so worth it.
Yep.
It's so worth the benefits and the connection it creates. Okay, so this is a funny question. In your research, have you found that being intimate so many times a week provides the relationship with a healthier environment? And if so, what is that number?
Here's the $1 million question, Trina. Yeah. No, I mean, and I'm not a fan of giving a number just because sure as shooting, somebody will use it to kind of beat another person over the head with it.
Yeah.
But having said that, the research tells us that healthy marriages tend to have sex somewhere in the 1 to 3 times a week range. That's kind of on the, I guess I shouldn't say, it's kind of on the high side. That's kind of the healthy couples.
Okay.
Again, obviously, there's not 100% of couples are healthy couples. So that's going to be high for maybe a lot of people that we're talking to.
Yeah.
Me personally, as a sex therapist, I kind of in the back of my mind am sort of, unless there's a really good reason not to, I'm sort of shooting for couples to at least have sex once a week.
Okay. Yeah.
That's my minimum. 1 to 2 would be kind of idealish.
Yeah.
Again, it depends on age, depends on any other physical, psychological issues in the marriage, but we start to run into more problems when there's too much space between, and it signals other issues in my book, which is I'm all about the wholeness and completeness and oneness concept, and so it kind of leaves a little bit of that out, especially when we know that most men feel love through affection and through touch of some kind. Mm-hmm. So I just know that the marriage is probably not in its strongest state.
Yeah.
I'm looking at less than that.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense to me, because I know in times that we've gone through dry spells, all of a sudden any issue's bigger. All the problems are as big as mountains, and then we'll find time to have that intimate moment, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, why was I stressed about that? Why was I worried about that, Like I said, it's a healer. It really is. I do believe that.
Well, and Trina, just to kind of support that point, remember there's a whole bunch of dopamine and oxytocin especially that you're missing out on. Again, this isn't your reason to go have sex by itself, but I just want to remind people of when you've got a fair bit of that oxytocin flowing on a fairly regular basis from touch, eye contact, affection, sex, any of these things, then that's why the frequency is sort of important in the bigger picture.
Yeah. That's so true. That was great. Perfect. All right. This is a funny one too. If you could pick one thing that women could do or think about to help them get in the mood, what would it be?
Okay, that's a good one. Yeah, listening to. I think the main thing to think about for women is that because we're not thinking about it very often. So men, my kind of analogy is that, men have this window that opens 15 times a day, sex window that opens 15 times a day. And during sex, we're trying to focus on that window and close all the other 15 windows we have open.
Yeah.
So one of the basic gist is anything that we can do that can help us to kind of have it on the forefront a little, that can make a difference. So a lot of my clients, one of the first things I kind of prescribe is any of my audiobooks, my podcasts, or other good books that are on audio, because it plays then in kind of the background of your life. Mm-hmm. And you start to have it kind of be a little bit more of a normalizing influence. So that's one. A second one is even just music. Some people, they're like, oh, I never listen to the radio, or I never listen to, popular music. I just listen to, church music, or I just listen. And I'm just like, well, that's great, except if you're trying to develop your sexual relationship, you might want to tweak that a little.
Yeah.
Because music is a really easy way to get in the mood.
Big influencer. Big influence.
A third one is texting playful texts to your spouse during the day. Mm-hmm. Connecting, being that teasing and playfulness, that teasing and playfulness is probably my number one. If I have to choose one thing to look at how a marriage is doing, I'm going to look at how playful they are, because that really kind of encompasses so much of everything. And I'm talking from a non-naturally playful person. I'm very type A, and so like I can be spontaneous if I schedule it.
Yeah.
and so this is a learned behavior for me. I had to learn this. But so some of these things can help just keep it a little bit more in the forefront.
Okay. I love that. I love that. Well, and that kind of takes us over into, and we kind of talked about this at the beginning. This question was on how much energy should a woman spend on making sure intimacy gets given enough attention in her marriage. You mentioned in the book to use details like sheets and nighties, smells, candles. Should this be something women should spend more time thinking and planning? Because isn't that part of the emotional part for us? If we're actually like putting the night together and planning it, and that's part of foreplay for me.
Yeah, that is our foreplay. You know, our foreplay begins, Trina, the minute the previous lovemaking ends.
Okay. All right. I like that.
All the context. That's emotional context. That's physical context. That's everything that occurs between then and now.
Oh my gosh.
That's all foreplay.
I love that. First. I have these candles that sit over the top of my bed. And I remember a friend of mine came in the house and was just looking, and she saw my candle. She goes, "Those have been lit?" I'm like, "Yes, they've been lit." And she was like shocked. I thought it was so funny. I'm like, "Of course I've lit them."
That's just sad.
I know. Sad. It really is. It really is, because there's like a whole nother part of intimacy that I think a lot of women have not been able to embrace and experience.
Yeah.
So that's the reason we are talking about it.
Yes, it is. Well, and a couple of thoughts about that, Trina. So number one, a lot of times women need these things for our sexual fulfillment. We need that context. We need to wear the lingerie. We need the candles, the dimly lit, and the music. We need that. So a lot of that can just be because it's functional. It helps us. Yeah. A lot of it can also be, and now if I just kind of go, back to not just those specific treats, well, and let me just continue on with, this is also what makes long-term marriages able to really go the distance with pizzazz, to create a sextraordinary marriage, is that we're constantly doing something that's a little new, a little different, because the brain really does like novelty. And so if we can let it have a little bit of that, again, that can go too far, which is where addiction takes you. Now you're addicted to novelty, almost, that same reward system in the brain. And so, it's really important for long-term purposes as well. But kind of if women don't make sex a priority, you do run into some dangers. We've got divorce on the table. We've got just dissatisfaction with sex, with marriage. You've got an unhappy husband. You've got an unfulfilled, unconnected. If you've got an unhappy husband, you probably have an unhappy wife, because nobody wants to meet each other's needs if nobody's needs are getting met. Mm-hmm. So again, I just need one of them to make the change, and we can change it. And then we're also more vulnerable to outside influences. So, if we can make this an important part of a great marriage, you protect yourself. You're just less vulnerable to all of the crap out there.
So true. It's so true.
It's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, it is a big deal. And that actually follows us right into the next question, that sex is such an important part of our marriage that like I said, I call it foundational. And if it's not good, it does affect everything. I love the quote you had in there from President Kimball. Oh my gosh, I'd never heard it. And that sex incapability is the root cause of divorce. Yeah. And like he said, it might not be what's talked about in the actual divorce, in the divorce in the courtroom, but that is a root cause. So that kind of tells you how important it is. It's so important. And you've already kind of clarified this question, that because of that is the reason why it is important that women take the time to embrace their sexuality.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's up to us how it's going to do it.
Yeah. I think that quote is so good. I just pulled it up. It's actually in the introduction of that book as well. And so I just thought I would read it because it's so great. But it's like, he says here, divorces often occur over sex. If you study the divorces, as we have had to do in these past years, and this is an old quote too.
Yeah.
You will find that there are many reasons. Generally, sex is the first. They did not get along sexually. They may not say that in the court. They may not even tell that to their attorneys, but that is the reason. And we do know that sex is up there in, it may not be number one right now, but it's definitely right up there at the top. It's, money, finances, in-laws, household responsibilities. Those are all up there, but sex is definitely with. And sex is probably higher up there than with the proliferation of pornography as well.
Yeah. So imagine for sure. Okay, so now I want to move over into teaching children about sex.
Yeah.
Your part in there is fantastic. I absolutely loved it. I wish, like I said, I would have known. I did not have anybody teach me. So I never had that experience. So when it came time to teaching my kids, I was like a deer in the headlights. What do I do? How do I say, And luckily my husband, he's really good at it. He taught the first three. He did it all on the first three.
Wow.
And so I was really grateful. Grateful for him. But I love how you talk about if we would be more open, if we would share more openly with our children at a young age, that it takes away their curiosity about sex and wanting to discover things on their own. Can you discuss a little bit more about this?
Yeah, I think, you've kind of already mentioned it, but, the key is just this. We're trying to change the taboo energy surrounding sex to change it to a very comfortable, accessible, confident, casual conversation where, in today's society, if you're kind of not having a fairly open, ongoing conversation with your kids, I guarantee they're learning it somewhere else. And you're not going to be happy about what they're learning. Because, this ongoing conversation that we need to be having is you're needing to unteach a bunch of things they're learning everywhere else. Mm-hmm. And if you don't stay kind of caught up with that, you're going to get way behind. And so that it is really an important thing to be doing. And I think that ideally, and I don't want to give people a reason to not talk to their kids, but ideally, if we can get couples to get their crap together, then they are going to naturally be able to teach and provide a feel about sex that's just so much easier and healthier and right, mm-hmm. that it'll be a lot easier to do. But I don't want people to not do it if they haven't got it all figured out themselves. But we are looking for that comfortable, and that's why the last 3 chapters of the book of And They Were Not Ashamed, I walk people through how to even practice in the mirror some of these conversations so that you fake it as well as possible.
Yes.
It's no big deal.
I love the realness of that because it is true. You're talking to your 12-year-old son and you're like, so we almost need to practice it. Like, okay, yep. I can say these words, yep. and I do believe that as we do it and as we work on it, it's going to get easier. It's going to get better. And we're going to see the benefits. We're going to see the benefits of them learning from us. Because I know when my kids were all young, we learned, my husband and I, when we were young married, that their first impression of sex is going to be their lasting impression. Yeah. And so if we can set that first impression, how much more powerful that is than if somebody else does it.
Yeah, and you also bring up a good point, just even in our response to anything sexual. This includes how you change a child's diaper. This includes how you respond if you happen to catch them looking at themselves, trying to figure themselves out at young ages, how you respond if you catch a teenager looking at porn. All of those things contribute to their sexual conditioning and their sex education. And so that's why if parents have done all of this work that you're having these women do, then all of the responses are just a little bit different now because of that work that they've done.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a part of their condition of that process as well.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. Okay. So my next question is, I have a son who just got engaged. So we are super, super excited. And I so want to give them this book and have them read it. But as we had our, one of our webinars that we do online, one of the, several of the moms are like, but what do you do? How do you keep them safe? Because it's really going to arouse some feelings and stuff. And so do you have any advice on that to moms as we want to share this with these engaged couples?
Yeah, I don't know that it's so much advice, but just things to think through, is that every child is so different, of course. And so, and where things are at with them and what's going on is such, so only a parent can make a really good advice right here based on that child. But here are some concepts that I would think with. Number one, I really don't like the idea anymore of couples going into marriage or into a honeymoon without a fairly decent dose of this information. I really, I'm working with couples 15, 17, 20 years into marriage that we messed it up so bad that first night that we are still undoing the damage. So that's my first context. So secondly then, okay, so there's a lot of different ways we can do it. Women, I think, are a different story because, again, we're 4 steps away from desire. So, and our arousal is just a slower build. So I think that the girls can pretty much read this almost any time, unless they personally know that they struggle with feelings like this. Because women are becoming a little bit more likely to move into compulsivity, sexual compulsivity, porn addiction, that is becoming a little bit more normal, or more not normal, frequent. Yeah. And so unless that's in the mix, I almost am fine with any girl reading any of this stuff, even after the age of 18. I mean, I have a daughter on a mission for our church right now. And I mean, I would have let her read my first book before she left, but I was like, honey, there's not really a point. You're leaving in a couple months. But yeah, if you want to read it when you get back, if you want to read them both when you get back, no big deal. Yeah. So it's different for girls than it is for guys. Okay, now for your son. I think that still, there's probably a way that I would try to figure out how to make that work for my son. That might be, he only reads it out in the living room. He doesn't read it with her. He reads it on his own, and then maybe they talk about it if they're at a public place. I would just brainstorm and think outside the box a little bit and talk to him and have him try it and see what it was like. And if that conversation is pretty open and casual, you're going to be able to kind of go, I might need to wait. Okay, then you better wait to read it. Okay, then let me tell you a few things you better know before you go.
Yeah, yeah.
And having your mother tell you is going to be less arousing. Oh, that's terrible.
So true. Well, that's what I was
we just found an answer.
It is. Moms, you just need to teach your sons.
They're gonna die.
Totally.
Do you get that, Trina? Do you get that?
Yeah. So, and do you have an opinion on like that before they're getting ready to go get married? Because I've always told my husband, I'm like, I really want you to talk openly. I had to have a discussion with Tylen and making sure that, he knew everything he needed to know going into it. Mm-hmm. I don't know how much he really did do because I wasn't there. Do you suggest it always be the same gender that's doing that, or can the mom do it for the son? What is it?
That's similar to how I talk about how to even do that first, some of those other conversations. Sometimes it works better when a child doesn't feel ganged up on with there's 2 parents. Wow. Sometimes it works better when the same gender parent does it. Sometimes it works better when just any parent will do it, and whoever will do it, that's the one we have do it. Yeah. Because there's usually one spouse that's a little more like me. And then one that's a little more normal and mellow and doesn't want to talk about that stuff as much. So whoever's willing, it's fine. Ideally, I would imagine, I don't have any kids married yet, but they're all older. I would imagine all of my kids could have a conversation with both my husband and I there. But I can still imagine individually talking with them because it's just different to have a one-on-one conversation than to have a two-on-one conversation.
Yeah.
And at the very minimum, I'm still a little nervous because I don't think the information is widespread enough for even parents to know, that I still would almost want these kids to read chapter 3, 4, and 5 of my first book and or my second book. Because I don't think a parent is going to tell them enough. Like, oh, by the way, a girl is 4 steps away from desire. She has to decide, and she has to be talked into it. That's emotionally connected with, and then touched into it, a little bit of arousal, and then she has desire. So, that, I can't imagine very many dads knowing that much and teaching it that well. Mm-hmm. And if they don't have that, I really would rather they read a book.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I like that. And I also am going to suggest that they take the book with them on their honeymoon.
Absolutely.
And that should be like a big study resource.
Required. Yep.
I totally think, how valuable that would be. Yeah. How valuable.
And that will be exactly the same with, my knowing her intimately and then knowing him sexually. Okay. That could easily be a study time of a honeymoon if people really wanted to.
Yeah.
Because it's just information people don't have enough of.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that. I'm so grateful that you have chosen to have this be your path in life. You are helping so many people. And I pray that it just keeps snowballing and we just get the word out and that women start feeling comfortable talking about it. And especially women that have struggles, that there's a resource somewhere that they can communicate with and learn from that's safe and not extremely worldly, because obviously we're so gun shy about anything like that. And so this is a really safe place. So I'm super.
Trina, that's exactly what we're going to do. That's what I'm going to do. No matter, that's, unless the Lord comes down himself and says, stop doing that. This is what I think I'm called to do. And that's what I think I'm going to do. And I have no interest in stopping no matter who gets in the way. So we got to get it done.
I love it. Okay, so my last question. I have been so anxious to ask you this question. So one of my clients, she actually saw you in Boise. They lived in Boise, her and her husband, and they loved you, and then they moved. But she said, I just said, so what did you think of her? How did you guys connect with her? And she goes, the one thing my husband and I both agreed upon is how feminine she is. And this is something this is part of what I work with women, because the world has masculated us. Yes. We are so masculine. We take on way too much accountability, which that's a masculine trait. We don't have the testosterone to handle how much accountability we do take on. And then also just, we're not connected to our feminine side. And we let go of, it's like I teach women that after they get married, they become intense. This intense woman comes into play, and we forget the contentness and the playfulness and the spontaneity, and even connected to spiritual. There's all these areas that we kind of give because we're now taking over the relationship and trying to make sure he's civilized and saved, and have this whole concept that I teach them. And so one of the things we do every month is I have a feminine challenge, something that they have to do weekly to help them embrace their femininity. So how you working in a masculine world, because, you're obviously working with clients, you're hearing all of them, their issues, and then you have to go home and somewhere you have to transition. What do you do? Because I can even feel it talking with you, that you have embraced your femininity. How do you do that? Is it because you talk about sex all day?
Well, you're close. I think a big part of it is, number one, all of the self-development work I've had to do is it naturally brings you to more of this wholeness place. And then the second part of it is to actually embrace your sexuality. You're embracing your femininity.
Oh,
you are. And that's why I can see God's hand in why sexuality is so important and why it feels sometimes like the crowning jewel of a marriage. Yeah. I mean, it's the one thing you can, according to, Christian thinking, it's the one thing you can have in marriage that you can't really have anywhere else.
Yeah.
And, that sexual relationship is so profound. And I totally chuckle to hear this question, because I literally am a very masculine personality. I'm really annoying and obnoxious to my poor husband, but I'm actually I've got all of those driven, independent, aggressive. I'm naturally that, just with personality. So that makes it almost a little tougher, where I'm not the normal feminine characteristics naturally. So all of those have been developed for me. And that's why I said number one was just the self-development work that you do. You kind of come into your own. You come into, if you're doing good therapeutic self-development work, you're becoming your divine self, what you were always supposed to be.
Yeah.
And I think sexuality just seals the deal on you developing your femininity. I also think that there are, a couple kind of specific things. Letting your husband, not letting, but honoring and respecting your husband as he is also a way you practice your femininity. Because again, I'm the worst offender, because I already am so driven, proactive, type A, red personality anyway, that I have to really be attentive to that in order to keep that balance between. Everybody has masculine and feminine traits. My job was just a little bit tougher to develop the feminine ones and to take the masculine ones down a bit. But again, it's doable, and it's just symbolic or symptomatic for me of what wholeness looks like.
I love that. And you validate the fact that it's a conscious effort. We have to consciously choose, okay, I'm going to work on this. I'm going to do better at this. That if we don't ever choose to do that, it's not going to just happen naturally on its own. We have to consciously be working towards, the self-improvement, the self-help, pushing ourselves. And I love that. And that's
what marriage is all about. Yeah. Marriage is all about self-development. I think God's primary purpose for marriage, why it's the crowning jewel of, I think, his plan for us, is in marriage, you can't get away with not fixing the areas you need to fix, or your marriage won't survive or thrive. Yeah. And then whatever marriage doesn't cover, parenting comes along.
Yeah, so true. If there's any missing areas, it's going to be found. Eventually found. They will point it out very directly.
Very directly.
Yes, for sure. So we will end on this one last question. Is there any one thing you wished all women knew and understood?
I think the number one thing I want to say is you can do this. Women can do this. I've done this. I know that this is what God would have women get and understand and embrace and bask in. And so related to that is embrace your sexuality, nurture your sexuality, develop this part of yourself, not just for your husband. I talk about in chapter 1 of my second book, these 3 levels of sexuality. Level 1 is I do sex and I don't want to, but I do it for my husband and I'm kind of angry about it. Mm-hmm. Level 2 is I've got a better attitude. I still am mostly doing it for my husband, but it's at least pleasant and sort of enjoyable. Level 3 is what I'm shooting for, which is I've embraced it. It's part of my wholeness. It's part of what makes me complete and alive, and I am doing it for me and for him, and that makes it all the more awesome. And that's how we can move towards what I believe we all are capable of, which is a sextraordinary marriage. It's an awesome marriage with that extra wonderful piece of the sex part too.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for your time.
It was fun.
I really admire the work that you're doing, and I just want to yell at the top of my lungs to everyone, you got to read this book. I might have to do a church talk and stand up and really shock everybody.
Yeah, I'm so grateful that you're doing this. I'm so grateful to anyone out there that is trying to do something in this category, because it's such a tough area. And I think that's why I love this so much, is that I know that it's difficult. So there's my masculine positive coming in, is that I'm kind of excited by the challenge instead of scared by it. Yeah. And so I think God knew that. and he used that to his advantage, and we're
Sure.
going to get this done.
Awesome. So great. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Tina.
We look forward to, we're going to eventually later on this year read this one as our book club. I will read it before then, but I'm super excited and I wish you the very best.
Thanks so much, Trina, and good luck to all your ladies. I'm cheering them on.
All right. Thank you so much.
You betcha.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.